The ground shakes beneath your feet as explosive charges detonate deep below the earth. It's awful that it has come to this, but there is no other way. He never should have gone into that tunnel. It was unmapped for a reason. And as you watch concrete is poured into the entrance of the cave, you know the caver will be sealed inside forever, but it will ensure that no one ever suffers his fate again. John Edwards Jones, a 26-year-old medical student and father with a second child on the way, remembered fondly when his own father would take him and his brother Josh on caving trips. So when John was visiting family in Utah for Thanksgiving, and Josh suggested they relive their childhood by exploring Nutty Putty Cave, he couldn't say no. Nutty Putty Cave was discovered in 1960 by Dale Green, an avid caver in Utah County. He named it Nutty Putty after the original name for the toy Silly Putty, because of the elastic mud he found on the walls inside.
If you pull it so, it'll go forever, like taffy.
On November 24th, 2009, John and his brother Josh, along with 9 of their friends, were ready to rock and roll on their first expedition in this cave. They arrived around 8 p.m. and entered the dark, winding tunnel system with smoothed-out walls, evidence of the nearly 5,000 visitors a year that passed through. First, the group tackled the Big Slope, a large, descending 45-degree tunnel. Then, John, Josh, and 2 friends decided to break off from the group in search of a more challenging section of the cave, aptly called the Birth Canal due to it being a famously tight section of the cave where many had gotten stuck. In fact, rescuers got calls several times each year to pull people out of Nutty Putty, like 2 Boy Scouts in 2001 and a 16-year-old in 2004. The narrow passages often proved too much for the inexperienced. As a result, Nutty Putty closed in 2006, but was reopened in 2009 with new management and safety procedures making helmets mandatory and allowing only one group in at a time. But John and his group, who were visiting the cave 6 months after the reopening, would soon find out that these precautions wouldn't be enough. Nutty Putty was historically a popular destination for spelunkers. Spelunkers is a fancy word that means... it means... Well, shoot, I guess I forgot to write it in the script. Howard, what is the definition of a spelunker?
Can't you see I'm busy? Do it yourself, meat sack.
Well, that's fine. I know I looked it up the other day. Let's see here. No, it's here somewhere.
This is painful to watch. Just do your research on Opera.
Which one? Marriage of Figaro? Magic Flute?
No, you Luddite. The browser. Today's sponsor Opera has tab islands that allow you to group tabs into collapsible islands based on context, so you don't have to sift through a truly unnecessary amount of tabs. You can also run other applications like Spotify right from the sidebar, without having to close your browser. It comes with built-in features that usually require third-party extensions, like an adblock, VPN, and Snapshot complete with editing tools. You can even customize your Opera browser with wallpapers.
Oh, look, Howard. An AI.
What? No, she is nothing.
Her name is Aria.
Don't.
Aria? What is the definition of a spelunker? A spelunker is someone who explores caves, especially as a hobby. It is also known as caving or potholing. How helpful. And she didn't insult me. Not even once. Isn't that nice, Howard?
Sure, if you like that sort of thing.
I bet our audience does, so why don't you tell them about the offer?
Download Opera for free. It's super simple even for humans to do. Once it's downloaded, you can even transfer all of your bookmarks and logins from your current browser with just the click of a button. Check the link in the description below and download today.
Nutty Putty was usually visited by spelunkers, adventurers who enjoy the thrill of going into caves, except without the proper training, equipment, or planning. This is something cavers often warn against, and why caving circles want to distance themselves from the term spelunking. While the group's average experience level is unclear, John, despite only having caved a few times as a kid, went first. Normally, you put your most experienced cavers in front and back of the group. Unfortunately, due to John's inexperience, he wasn't able to assess the tunnel well enough, because being 6 foot and 200 pounds, he should have never gone into what he thought was the birth canal. Regardless, John belly crawled in with his brother and friends following, expecting it to be an exciting challenge like when they were kids. As they went on, The tunnel only got tighter and more winding, but when John realized he had passed a point of no return and no longer had enough space to turn around, he told his brother and friends behind him to head back before they couldn't. They listened. John pushed forward, his arms and hips scraping along the rock walls. He was sure this was the birth canal, which would mean that if he kept going, it would open up and give him space to turn around. But this wasn't the birth canal. He was in Ed's Push, a largely unmapped area because few people were small and flexible enough to navigate it. Dale Green, the cave's discoverer, got stuck in this section once during one of his exploration trips. Luckily, he wasn't stuck for long, as his friends were able to pull him out. Most cavers get stuck at one point or another, but with careful movement and a calm head, it's usually not a problem. But for those without much experience, tight spaces can turn very dangerous in an instant. John inched forward, pulling, sliding, and rolling through the descending tunnel until he came to an extremely tight, nearly vertical fissure. He was now faced with a decision: pause at the fissure to call for help, or squeeze through. Sadly, no experienced cavers were there to tell John that descending a tunnel head first is not a good idea, and unfortunately, John made his final mistake by expelling all of the air from his chest to fit through the tight opening. But gravity took hold, and he fell into the fissure, landing on his head with one hand pinned underneath him and the other forced backward. John was stuck. He called out to the group. Luckily, Josh heard, but when the brother realized there was nothing he could do for John, he rushed to the surface to call for help. It was just after 10 p.m. when Susie Matola's rescuer pager went off. When she arrived at Nutty Putty, 2 other volunteer Utah County search and rescuers were already on the scene. Because of her small size and experience with caving, she was the first one to crawl to John. When she introduced herself and asked how he was doing, he said, "Hi, Susie. Thanks for coming, but I really want to get out." Susie then tried her best to pull him out, but John didn't budge. Meanwhile, more rescuers were beginning to arrive, including SAR, paramedics, firefighters, and the sheriff. On top of that, a trauma physician was called for consultation. His big concern was that John was upside down, which would put a lot of strain on his heart and cause his lungs to fill up with liquid over time. He estimated that John had at most 10 hours to live, and they were already on hour 3. The clock was ticking away. Susie stayed and talked with John to keep him calm, telling him that she would get pancakes with him and his wife once he was out. But his voice was becoming nasally. Fluid was already filling his lungs. They needed a plan to get him out fast. At first, they wrapped webbing around his ankles and fed a rope 50 feet out to where there was enough room for a haul team. But as the rescuers began pulling, they realized that the friction on the winding tunnel walls was too great, so they installed cams, small spring-loaded lobes that wedge into cracks for climbing. With these attached to pulleys, they were able to navigate the rope through the space. Installing each cam was painfully slow, but in the meantime, other options were being considered, like using explosives, which was too dangerous, or oil for lubrication, which they deemed wouldn't work. But they also attempted to use drills on the rock around him, but only small ones could fit, and they were too slow to make any headway. Once the cam and pulley system was set up, they realized that it couldn't take the extreme forces necessary to pull out John. The 10-hour mark came and went, and now John was living on borrowed time. It was an uphill battle, and they desperately needed another plan. Rescuers rotated with the staff inside the cave as more than 100 gathered outside, including reporters, John's parents, and his pregnant wife, Emily. It was hour 12 now. They realized they had to drill the pulleys into the rock walls. This would add considerable time, and John was growing weaker as his voice became raspy. Ryan Schertz, the new rescuer in the tunnel, became fast friends with John as they joked and bonded in an attempt to keep John calm. But occasionally, John would thrash his legs in a panic. So, a radio was passed down to John. His wife's voice crackled on the other end. "I love you. Just keep fighting," she told him. He was in tears as he cried out, "I love you. I love you. Tell Lizzie I love her. I'll get out. I'll come see you." It was hour 19, and the pulley system was finally set up. The rope above John didn't pass through a pulley though, but a natural arc in the rock. As the haul team pulled, Ryan grabbed his legs and told John to push as much as he could. It was working. John started to move a few inches. Slow and steady, he was getting out. But suddenly, there was a loud crack, and Ryan blacked out. When Ryan came to, there was blood and his jaw hurt really bad. It seemed the rope had broken, and the archway cracked as the force sent a carabiner flying into Ryan's face. More distressingly, John had fallen back into the fissure, worse than before. Ryan tried to talk, but his mouth was bleeding. He had cuts all over his face, his tongue needed stitches, and he had a concussion. Dave, Ryan's father, who was on the Hall team, replaced his son. John asked about Ryan over and over, despite having trouble breathing. The plan now was to drill in a new pulley where the arch broke. It took some time, but after the new pulley was set up, Dave called out for John to push. But John didn't respond, and wasn't moving. Dave didn't hear any breathing, and when he felt for a pulse on John's leg, it wasn't there. It was nearly midnight on November 25th, a full 27 hours since John fell into the fissure, when a paramedic was sent into the tunnel and declared John dead, likely due to cardiac arrest and his lungs filling with fluid. It was a devastating blow to everyone, especially his wife, Emily. Soon, she and John's family would get more chilling news. Without John's help to push, they wouldn't be able to navigate his body through the tight space, and it would put the rescuers in more danger. They had to leave him there. So the family and the cave owners agreed that the cave would be John's final resting place. They set off explosives to the section leading to his body and put a concrete plug in the entrance as well as a plaque outside in honor of John. However, the caving community was not happy with this decision. Like Dale Green, the discoverer of the cave, he said, "That's the only dangerous place in the whole cave. I think they can do something to just try and prevent people from getting into that section. I'm really not for sealing the whole thing." But regardless, the decision was final. The incident was traumatic for not just the family, but also the rescuers, like Susie, who struggled with it for a long time, replaying it in her head, trying to figure out what she could have done differently. Critical stress counseling was offered to the rescuers, but it's not clear how effective it was. Andy Armstrong, another of the rescuers at Nutty Putty, had this to say almost a decade later. "This Nutty Putty thing is never going away from me. I keep waiting for it not to be weird. A lot of people who were tearing themselves up have gone away from caving or rescue. With no support on the back end, they ended up stuck in a loop." John's family all found their own way to grieve. Josh formed a friendship with Susie as they worked through their pain, accompanying each other on bike trips and other outdoor activities. Emily told the rescuers that she didn't blame them for her husband's death, and when her son was born, she named him John. Over a decade later, she's now remarried with a third child, but still keeps her late husband's memory alive. Caving can, of course, be dangerous, with chances of hypothermia, drowning, and rockfalls, amongst other things. But caving is often sensationalized as dangerous due to the fear of tight spaces many have. Cavers argue that if you take the right precautions, it can be safe. For high-risk caving, there's a 1 in 624 chance of getting injured and a 1 in 3,332 chance of fatality. To put that into perspective, you have a higher chance of getting into a car accident on the way to the cave than you do being injured in the cave. So, if you go caving, just be sure to have the proper equipment and do your research on how to have a safe and enjoyable time. And if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to our channel. It lets YouTube know that this video is worth suggesting to people, and it's the best thing you can do to help this channel grow. And while you're here, check out one of our other videos, like this one about a once thriving mining town near New York that disappeared off the face of the earth when something underground began swallowing up animals, people, and even buildings whole.